continuación, el panelista Travis de Johnson de la IAC. Yo como Wayne Roberts sé que todos hablan español, yo como él habla inglés por deferencia hablaré mi poquito inglés y lo presentaré en inglés. Travis D. Johnson is Vice President, Legislative Affairs and Senior Counsel at the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition in Washington, D.C. In his capacity, he oversees all aspects of the organization's government relations and policy development functions throughout the Americas. He has co-authored the IAC INTA Model State Criminal Trademark Counterfeiting Statute, served as the principal author of criminal trademark legislation enacted in 7 states, testified before a number of state legislatures and the US Congress. He has a degree in law with focus in intellectual property rights and is member of the Florida Bar. Travis will present his panel today, focused mainly on the roadblock program, that is quite interesting, as I said before. So, Travis, it's your turn.
Buenos días. Yo estudio español para 3 años en el colegio, pero hablo muy malo. So for your sake and for my sake, I will speak in English today. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to join you here today, ASIPI and all of the attendees as well. Particularly the opportunity to speak about issues related to counterfeiting online, which has been one of the main areas of focus for the IACC over the past few years. Being cognizant of the limited time that we have, and I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, I will skip over the slide with information about IACC. If you're interested in learning more about the organization, happy to speak with you at length later on. I guess about 5 years ago, the topic of discussion with regard to counterfeiting and piracy in the U.S. Began to focus greatly on the online concerns that were becoming a growing problem. There was a very extensive debate in the U.S. Congress around 2 pieces of legislation that we referred to as SOPA and PIPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protecting Intellectual Property Act. Looked into a number of issues, including expanding liability for third parties, internet service providers, search engines, all of the major intermediaries in the online space. And ultimately, both of those bills failed to be enacted by Congress, but the discussion that was started then really, for the first time, sort of opened the doors for sort of cordial and cooperative discussion between a lot of the rights holders in the U.S. And the intermediaries that we were dealing with there. So the IACC at that time began working with the payment sector, primarily the major credit card companies, looking into where we could find an effective means of dealing with a lot of the problems that we were seeing online. There was a massive growth in standalone websites that were dedicated exclusively to selling counterfeit and pirated goods. A lot more traffic than we had seen in the past. Counterfeit product being sold through online marketplaces such as Mercado Libre, eBay, Amazon. All of the sites that I'm sure most of the crowd here is very familiar with. But a lot of the tools that were traditionally used by rights holders online, we had found to be insufficient, to say the least, in many cases, very time-consuming, very resource-consuming, very expensive, and ultimately not actually providing any significant reduction in the amount of counterfeit goods that we would see online. So we decided to get back to the basics of what the problem is, what we were trying to accomplish, and if there's one thing that you take away from my presentation, I would say take away this. It was sort of the fundamental idea that we came down to, is that counterfeiting is a business first and foremost. it might be an illegal business, but it's a business nonetheless. So, if we want to, negatively impact those businesses, how do we treat them? How do we address them? And we came to, this conclusion. We want to disrupt, dismantle, and demonetize the networks that are involved with the trafficking of counterfeit goods. So how do we do that? We drive up their costs of doing business. We do what we can to drive their prices down, and ultimately we do what we can to keep them from getting paid at all. Unfortunately, a lot of the tools, as I was saying before, that were traditionally used by rights holders are not particularly effective or efficient means of doing any of these three things. I know there's a lot of lawyers in the crowd. Who here has sent a cease and desist letter to a counterfeiter? Somebody trafficking counterfeit goods. You send a letter saying, "We've become aware of your site. We know that you're trafficking an illegal product." How often do you get a response to those? Not very often. When you do, frequently it's the case of an innocent infringer who didn't know what they were doing, saying, please don't sue me, I promise to stop doing it. When you're dealing with individuals or organizations who are intentionally engaging in this sort of activity, though, who are intent on selling counterfeit products, they're doing it as a business, in all likelihood you're not going to get any response from them. That's even more frequently the case when the individual that you're asking to stop engaging in illegal activity is based in another legal jurisdiction. I can't tell you how many times we've seen rights holders complain that the Chinese counterfeiting operation that they've demanded cease operating their illegal business has not responded, and they don't understand why. And it's mainly because the individuals are far removed from any possibility that the rights holder is going to be able to effectively go after them. You can file a lawsuit in the U.S. You might even get a judgment in the U.S. Many companies do. You see big headlines about a big company who gets a verdict for hundreds of millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, in most cases, they aren't able to collect any of that money because the individual has all of the money overseas. They have no fear of being imprisoned or incarcerated because they're far beyond the reach of the law. We look at things like the UDRP, the Uniform Domain Name Resolution Procedures, originally created as sort of an expedited, more efficient way to obtain a domain name. But if you have identified an individual who's trafficking in counterfeit goods, you go through the UDRP process, you get a favorable ruling. At the end of the day, what do you really get out of it other than a new domain name that you have to pay for and you have to warehouse? At the end of the day, the counterfeiter, though, moves their entire operation to a new domain name. They keep the exact same site that they've already had operating. All they have to do is point their server, point the hosting to the new location. And in most cases, they're going to be their website will be down. They'll be out of business for at most 24, 48 hours before they're back in business operating again as usual. The same thing is true for litigation. It was very popular a couple of years back for rights holders to file, in some cases, John Doe suits, where they would go after domain name after domain name in a single litigation, identify as many as they could, get a court order requiring the registrars to turn the domain names or turn control of the domains over to the rights holder. But again, it takes very little time, very little effort, and very little money really for the counterfeiters to point their operations to a new website and be back up operating in business again. Notice and takedown provisions, same sort of deal, whether it's on a marketplace or it's website, an internet search engine. If you look at Google has a monthly or quarterly transparency report that they put out showing the number of URLs that they remove from their search engine, the number of listings that, are taken down every month. And every month it's, ballpark somewhere around 15 million listings or, somewhere around there. They've been doing this for years and years, every month, and, every month the numbers that are taken down don't seem to be getting any smaller, and it's the same thing. It's very, very easy for a counterfeiter to move their operations to a new site, point their advertising to this new site, update their spam emails that are pushing people towards those sites. So ultimately, rights holders are spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of their budgets for their legal teams on enforcement methods that ultimately are not very effective. So the roadblock program that we put together in collaboration with the credit card companies was started back around 2012, and the underlying rationale was, if we can find a way to cut off the money that's going to the counterfeiters rather than some of the other ancillary tools that they use. It's very easy to get your web hosting changed. It's very easy to put up a new website. Very easy to get a new domain name. It's a bit more difficult to get a new credit card account. For those of you who have gotten credit card merchant accounts for your own businesses, you've probably been through the process. There's a significant amount of paperwork that needs to be done, background checks that need to be run. All of the credit card companies, all of the banks that are going through this process of onboarding merchants are supposed to be doing their due diligence to make sure that bad actors are kept out of the system. So how it works, we initially back in 2011, 2012 began working primarily with Visa and MasterCard. These were the two biggest credit card payment providers that we were seeing on the websites that most of the counterfeit goods that we were seeing trafficked were being excuse me. Those are the two payment services that most of the counterfeit sites were accepting or were using to transact their purchases, along with PayPal as well. And working with Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, discovered very quickly that it's very easy to put together a global program. Visa and MasterCard, I should say, have been fantastic partners thus far, from the very beginning. And one of the benefits that we found in working with them is that we were able to put together a global program with very little consideration as to what the local laws are, because of the way that the Visa and MasterCard systems are set up. The relationship that the credit card networks have is not a direct one with the merchant or with the consumer. They have intermediary banks in between their services. So you have a Visa and MasterCard would have an acquiring bank or a merchant bank, as we more frequently refer to them. That merchant bank is responsible for bringing on merchant companies, the individuals like online vendors or sellers who are looking to sell products and receive payments. Then you have the issuing banks on the other side. Those are the banks that are responsible for providing credit cards to the end consumers. Both the issuing and the merchant banks are bound by Visa and MasterCard's policies, which apply worldwide, no matter where they are. One of those most important policies is the Visa and MasterCard, and eventually we got to all of the others. But the credit card companies' services are explicitly prohibited from being used to facilitate illegal activity. The illegal activity is defined as any transaction or sale or purchase that would be illegal in the jurisdiction of the buyer or of the seller. So takes a little bit of the guesswork out of whether or not something would satisfy the criteria in a particular jurisdiction as to whether it would be, a counterfeit, sale of a counterfeit good, or if it was, a closer call, possibly just an infringement, something like that. Although we see very few of those online in the work we do, very few close calls. But the only thing Visa and MasterCard or any of the other companies are concerned with is, is it illegal to sell the product where the seller is located? Is it illegal to sell the product where the buyer is located? So just about any jurisdiction in the world, a sale of counterfeit goods is going to be an enforceable offense under the credit card company's terms of service. How it works. It's a little bit complicated looking from the diagram, but I can walk you through it fairly quickly. We started the program with about 30 participants, all individual rights holders, trademark owners, copyright owners. They do all of the upfront investigation and research. They identify the websites that are trafficking in counterfeit product. They provide an affidavit verifying that they have, done the research, whether it's, they were able to make the determination based, strictly on the pictures that are being used on the site, or if they've done a test transaction, have actually physically purchased and received counterfeit product from the site. Either way, they'd be able to run it through the system. Once they've filled out a fairly simple form, they submit it through a web portal that we've created that includes a catalog of all of the individual participants, trademark and copyright registrations. We do some initial sort of cleanup work and analysis to determine that yes, this is a claim that has provided the sort of minimum requirements, the minimum evidence that the credit card companies would require to take action against the site. We also have added in a few steps over the course. We now do some network mapping that's referenced up there, that's broken down a little bit later in one of the other slides, where most people, at least initially, tend to think of most of the online sellers as being sort of a mom and pop, small businesses selling, selling items for one or two brands. What we found over the course of the past few years is that most of them are in fact larger networks, comprised of dozens, if not hundreds, of individual websites, involved in trafficking an entire range of counterfeit goods, whether it be apparel, pharmaceutical. They're very well organized, and certainly not a one-to-one sort of thing. We've built in some cooperation with some of our law enforcement partners. We've worked closely with Department of Homeland Security in the U.S., French Customs, and a couple of others, more sporadically. But obviously, in doing this sort of self-help, independent activity, one of the concerns is if law enforcement organizations are already investigating the targets of our enforcement activities, we don't want to blow up any sort of major investigation that they may have going on. So before any of the information is sent from us to the credit card companies or the payment providers, there's essentially a 48 to 72-hour window that law enforcement personnel have an opportunity. They have a window into our system so that they can take a look and determine whether or not these are active investigations or targets that they have, and if so, they're able to put an administrative hold on any action that we would take, so as to not preclude their further investigation. Once that's taken place, we port all of the information simultaneously to any of the payment partners that have been identified as being an accepted form of payment on a rogue website. So if it was a single site that indicated they accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Western Union. All of those individual partners would receive notification at the same time, all through our portal. And at that point, they conduct their own independent investigation in order to ensure that this is a clear violation of their policies and somebody that they would want to take action against. I can say that in almost every case that we've submitted, I think without fail we've had a resolution from the payment partner. Either they've further investigated and discovered that the website claims that they accept their form of payment, but they actually don't. That's one thing that we discovered very quickly. There were a lot of websites that claim that they accept a certain credit card processing that in fact do not. American Express, probably in particular, American Express and Discover have tended to have a much smaller footprint, just because in most cases their transaction fees tend to be higher, and the counterfeiters are trying to keep their expenses down. In many cases, we'll have our analysts conduct a test transaction, and they'll discover that when you attempt to make payment, the payment's rejected. The website will contact you by email and say, our credit card processing is down this week, but if you could email us or send a bank wire, to this bank with this receiver information, they would be happy to process the order, which is fantastic for us because it provides even more information about the individuals who are behind the site, which is something we are always keen on finding out. One of the major things that we've been doing with this regard is we've been using the system as a tool to further develop intelligence and information, both for our law enforcement partners who may be interested in taking criminal action against the networks, or to generate evidence that may be useful for civil actions as well. This diagram here doesn't really do much without context, but this is the sort of thing that we've discovered in doing the process. You don't have a lot of standalone sites like this one just off on its own. What we see are very complex networks, which actually increases the benefit of the program, because rather than taking out a merchant account that's dedicated to one website, it's a one user, one merchant, one website. We've found that if we're able to identify where the sort of nexus is for the larger networks, if we are able to take out that merchant account right there, then we end up taking out all of the ability of all of the websites surrounding it to be able to process payment. So we have a huge multiplier effect. To date, we've had I think approximately somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 merchant sites or merchant accounts terminated since the program began in earnest the past 3 years or so. Those individual merchant accounts, though, are believed to be linked up to in excess of 250,000 operating commercial counterfeiting sites. When we began, we also started with a universe of about 3,000 acquiring banks. And out of those, about 200 were willing to take on high-risk merchants, which counterfeiters are frequently identified as once they've been tagged with having a once they've been tagged with having a first offense violation of the credit card network's policies. We've gotten those down to about 20. Most of those banks now located whether in Eastern Europe or in China, which enables us to target potential litigation against some of the known bad actors. Running short on time, so we have seen quite a bit of development, and the counterfeiters are nothing if not resourceful. So we've seen a lot of movement in the past couple of years away from the traditional website and or marketplace model of sales to mobile apps. We've seen a lot fewer folks being willing to take credit card or not so much that they're not willing to take credit card, they're just simply unable to get a new merchant account, so they've had to shift towards bank wire transfers, virtual currencies like Bitcoin. We often see websites advertising that they will give you a discount if you use a money transfer wire service. I think we'll leave the rest of the time here for questions, though. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Travis. Thank you very much for your presentation. Ahora se abre un turno rugo de preguntas, pero como estamos fuera de plazo, intentad ser lo más benévolo posible.
Hi, thank you. It was excellent, very informative. I would like to know from Lorenzo and Travis, in addition to the credit cards, has been any action in Europe against the transportation companies such as Federal Express? Well, that's what we normally use in the United States since they are transporting counterfeit merchandise. The other question is, what about the landlords of buildings that warehouse the infringing products? Obviously, you see it on the side, but more than likely there is a very large quantity. And I recall a case in New York where Louis Vuitton was successful against a landlord that was known for warehousing, basically renting to a tenant that was warehousing merchandise that was counterfeit. So if you can tell me what the situation is in Europe, and I'd like to hear the comments from Travis as well.
All right. Well, with regard to the landlord issue, there's very well-established case law in the United States, not just in New York, but there have been notable cases in California, Texas, and it's generally recognized under the vicarious liability common law that where the landlord has knowledge of the illegal activity that's going on at his premises, that he can in turn be held responsible for that activity. New York has made is probably the longest standing of those, and they've had nuisance abatement laws in New York City that have been adopted, which allow for continual monitoring. They require the landlords to include provisions in their leases prohibiting illegal activities and allowing for regular inspections without notice. This has been particularly helpful in cleaning up the Chinatown, Canal Street area in New York, where we traditionally saw the biggest problems. And it's been so effective that in many cases you see a lot of the business, particularly a lot of the storage, moving out of New York into across the river into New Jersey. Thankfully, the authorities in New Jersey have also taken an interest and have gone after a lot of the mini storage units that the counterfeit operators have been using to temporarily hold their goods and then bring them over into small shipments in the U.S. As far as the transportation companies, and if you look at the seizure stats in the U.S. From U.S. Customs, there's only two areas in the past couple of years where you've seen an increase in the volume or the value of the seizures that are taking place, and those are with the express delivery companies like your FedExes, DHL, UPS, and the international mail shipments. Most of the websites that we see coming through the roadblock program either specifically identify international EMS as the method of shipment, or they identify one of the major carriers, probably most frequently DHL, just because they have a larger footprint in China and South Asia than most of the other carriers. But excuse me, all three, all of the major, shipping companies have at least shown some interest in working with rights holders. We're, still in very early stages of discussions to try and use some of the intelligence and some of the information that we've been generating to get the same sort of collaboration out of them that we've gotten out of the credit card companies, which would be to, when we've identified that these are definitely bad actors who are engaged in illegal activity, that they would take the, the proactive step of denying them the use of their services going forward, particularly where it's, a corporate account and they're doing, large-scale shipping, repeat business. They've, got a customer account with the company and they've been identified as, a bad actor, someone who's engaged in illegal activity. They should be, in our opinion, willing to take that step and deny service to them going forward.
Gracias, Diana. Bueno, para contestarte se necesitaría unas horas, pero buscando de decirlo en unas palabras, hablando de las empresas que llevan los productos, se han hecho grandes pasos adelante en los últimos años. En el segundo caso de que estaba hablando, ahí mismo hemos tenido una colaboración bien fuerte de una empresa, de TNT, que hemos descubierto en las investigaciones que era el vector usado por los criminales y demostrando que había un crimen y que había una posibilidad de que ellos sabían de eso, hemos tenido la orden del juez para que ellos nos pasaran todos los datos de todas la mercancía que fue enviada afuera de la fábrica utilizando ese medio, y en esta manera hemos llegado a los números que decía antes. Así sabemos que fueron 180.000, sabemos dónde han ido, hemos metido después demandas en varios países para recuperar los daños y perjuicios donde era posible. Entonces hay una gran ayuda, y hay una gran ayuda, como decía justamente Travis, de los mayores, obviamente, que están interesados porque no quieren perder las grandes empresas como clientes. Y entonces en Italia, y eso lo puedo decir sobre Italia, después no sé exactamente en los otros países, pero en Italia, en las aduanas mayores, donde hay grandes almacenes de esos vectores, ellos permiten a los agentes de aduanas de ir a hacer directamente los controles ahí para hacerlo más rápido, y aceptan que los titulares de marcas a través de los agentes de aduanas pasen un listado de empresas que están en blacklist para enviar los productos. Así que por lo menos hay un mínimo de colaboración. El problema siempre es lo de la velocidad con que se va a entregar el producto, que para ellos es fundamental, y entonces el trabajo de la aduana no tiene que ponerse en contra de eso. Hablando de los titulares de los almacenes donde se hacen los productos, ahí es un poco más complicado, porque el problema es que en la mayoría de los casos, y aquí también hablando sobre todo de mi experiencia italiana, la mayoría de los productores compran los almacenes porque por varias razones le funciona mejor, sobre todo cuando son chinos, que hay una grande producción por chinos en Italia. Y en otros casos me ha pasado en que hemos convocado también el titular del almacén, pero solo en un caso ha sido condenado, y solo porque sabía del tráfico, de la actividad que había adentro, porque estaba pagado en negro. Así que ha sido pagado por temas pero de tributación, que estaba bien porque era una demanda penal, así que el District Attorney pidió también ese tipo de violación, pero no directamente por ser involucrado en una falsificación, sino por ser involucrado en otro tipo de crimen.
And I would want to add one more thing, with regard to the shipping companies. There's FedEx in the United States. It's not so much IP related, but FedEx is currently under federal criminal indictment in the United States related to transportation and shipment, apparently, according to the indictment, knowing transportation and shipment of pharmaceuticals illegally imported into the United States. Not clear whether or not any of those, shipments, involve, sort of rogue pharmacies selling counterfeit product or not, but I think that's, there's certainly more attention being brought to the issue of, the logistics providers and the other transportation intermediaries and the role that they play in the distribution of illicit goods.
Mi pregunta va relacionado con el uso cada vez mayor de los bitcoins, ¿no? Como todos sabemos, las características es que no hay un banco, no hay un estado, un gobierno que tenga el control sobre los bitcoins. Entonces, ¿cómo pueden controlar la utilización de bitcoins para la compra y venta de mercaderías falsificadas? ¿O cuáles son los desafíos para las empresas ante el uso de los bitcoins?
If I had the answer to that, I would probably, get a promotion. But I was going to say at this point, that's, the virtual currencies are, thankfully, we're not seeing them used too widely. And where they are, they're usually being used in conjunction with, with other sources. I think one of the goals when we started the roadblock program was, I don't think anybody is, naive enough to think that we're going to be, successful in putting, the counterfeiters out of business entirely. But we certainly want to make it more difficult for them to operate. And, when if you're a consumer and you go to a website and, you try to make a payment using Visa and they don't accept the Visa card, they don't accept MasterCard, they don't accept American Express. Eventually, you're going to get to the point, where you're either thinking maybe this site isn't necessarily on the up and up, or maybe it's just too much of a hassle and too much trouble, to try and do business with them. As far as being able to block the transfer of Bitcoin or anything like that, any of the alternative payments, I don't think we're there yet, and I'm not sure that we will get there, but I would certainly say that we are looking at every option possible. So.
Bueno, gracias a todos los asistentes por la paciencia y espero que les haya gustado la... ¿Hay más preguntas? Que les haya gustado las presentaciones. Sin más, podéis pasar al almuerzo. Y gracias a los panelistas, a los presentes y los ausentes.